Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Howling Coyote. And I'm privileged to have Nadia Colburn on the program today. And she is a poet and an essay writer and the author of High Shelf. And she has a new book coming out, which she will read from, called I Say the Sky. And she has an online writing school called Align Your Story. And I'm sure she'll tell us a whole lot more about herself as the time progresses. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to everyone from the homeland of the Penobscot Nation. And I want to acknowledge their elders, past, present, and future, and to note that this is still unceded territory and they want their land back. So, so it goes. So, Nadia, tell us a little bit about you and your journey in life and story and all of that.
Well, I grew up in New York City, um, also unceded land. Um, and I think growing up in New York City, I just it's like a whole world of that New York City kind of Upper West Side intellectual space of and I loved reading, and I grew up in a house full of books and um, went on and got a PhD in literature. And at a certain point, partly I think being a mother and partly kind of confronting aspects of my own story that I hadn't really consciously dealt with, I realized I needed a whole lot of other tools. And that tradition that I came from, a kind of European centric, like intellectual tradition, had given me so much, but there was much that had been left out. And it was actually then that I first found your work, when I was really looking for what what are other ways to understand story, to understand what it means to be a person. How does the body fit in? How does history fit in different ways? I started to remember, giving you the whole, I'm going too fast. But anyway, maybe I'll stop. I'll say more later. But I started to just bring in different traditions and do really deep healing work myself, and come into a kind of more holistic approach to story and to understanding who I am, and helping other people do the same.
So let's at least put in a plug for your alma mater. Where did you get your PhD?
I got my PhD at Columbia University in New York.
Ah,
Yeah.
this is Columbia, home of Rita Sharon and the narrative medicine program.
Yes.
Yes.
Which I'm not sure was there when I was getting my PhD back then. And it's interesting. All these different programs are very distinct. So I was getting a PhD in literature. I don't know how much connection there is between the literature program and the narrative medicine program. And I was really interested um, in writing poetry. And I had some friends who were in the MFA program, and I went over to the MFA program and wanted to take some classes over there. And they were like, no, you can't take classes. There are no bridges between these different programs. So I ended up taking classes with a poet, Lucy Brock Broido, who was teaching in the MFA program, but I couldn't take her class in the program. I had to take her class um, that she taught out of her house, which was an amazing class. So lucky to be able to do that. Um, but there are just all these divides in the academic world.
It's so true. The academic world is so siloed. And we observed that a few years ago at a narrative conference in Paris. And we put together a whole program on stories and medicine. And we had 5 people show up. So, and they were more interested in comic books. There
Mm-hmm.
were 200 people in the comic book symposium. So we realized that there's quite a divide among silos in the academy.
Yeah, and I think it's really too bad, but I think there's this idea that, healing is not serious work and it's not something to kind of do in public. And uh, that's an over exaggeration, of course, but I think that's really unfortunate, and especially, given the state of the world that we live in, and not only individual healing, but social collective healing is so, so important. And if it's not like deeply respected work, like what is respected, right? So like, I don't know, I also love your stories about being a doctor and being in med school and the kind of ways in which you talked about um, teachers saying, well, the inevitable process of life is we just get older and deteriorate and die, and that's it. And all we can do is kind of slow down the process. And you talked about wanting to go find different narrative around what it means to come to the end of life, and or go back to narratives that you had gotten as a child from your grandmother, and look for indigenous teachers who see like growth throughout our life and into the next dimension.
Right. That was certainly important for me, and it has been. And it's funny, I spent the last weekend being the attending for the teaching service, adult medicine teaching service at the training program. And I'm always struck by how depressing it is that, that we don't find anything to celebrate.
Hmm.
I mean, and it's funny, what we celebrate are people having strange, weird diseases that we can diagnose. And what we obsess about are people having strange, weird diseases that we can't diagnose.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
We're not very interested in their stories, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and I wonder, what do you think this siloed thing is all about? I mean, how does that serve us?
Well, I mean, I think it's partly economic, right? That people get into these little silos. I think it's partly, um, I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to be disrespectful of a tradition that has a lot to offer, but a story that I find interesting and moving that I think of is the story of Descartes, who's, one of the first people to do vivisections, right? Like to actually look at what was happening inside the body. And he did, I guess, vivisections of animals. And when the animals would scream because they were in pain, he just cut their vocal cords out because he believed, and apologies if that was difficult for anyone to hear, but he believed, well, animals' cries don't really mean anything. So we can just not listen to them and then they won't be there. But he was so invested in this kind of like scientific method. Um, and, he kind of, his famous line is, I think, therefore I am. But being able to think and see at the expense of hearing and listening, and wanting to look at um, a system without understanding how it fits into a like a container of life. It feels like we are in a system that does that again and again and again.
Right. Yet he was, of course, he famously separated church and medicine, which I suppose was needed at the time, but hasn't really served us in the long run.
Right. And yeah. Um, but that spiritual component, right? Or like the belief that there's a larger connection to everything, seems like at odds with a kind of quote unquote scientific intellectual belief. And so there's more and more push to just understanding with your mind. but you can't just understand with your mind because we're not just minds.
Right, which leads us to poetry, I think.
Hmm.
Right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's how we communicate full body understanding.
yeah, and also understanding beyond the analytical brain, right? Um, the space of intuition, the space of dream, the space of connections that are made that are um, beyond analytical connections. When you put two objects together in a poem or two images together, it has a different meaning from just having one image and then another image. And so much of the scientific method is looking at one thing one at a time. But what happens when it's all relational in a poem? Like, here's one word, but what happens to this word when it's next to this other word? And what happens to the sound? And what happens to the image? And how does it make you feel? Not just what is, because you can't really translate a poem into, well, this poem means this. What it means is exactly what the poem is, what the poem says. You can give a kind of crib of it or a restatement of it, but it's in the exact kind of order in which it manipulates the images, and they evoke kind of a series of sensations in the reader. So it's all relational. Um, and you can't take that relationship out of the meaning.
We definitely found that. And this past year, I taught a seminar at the University of Maine on art and medicine. And part of it was poetry. And the students discovered the power of poetry for expressing complex ideas. And some of them who were visual artists and some of them who were doctors had never realized that poetry could be so powerful. And that was a wonderful um, discovery for them. I think the most incredible poem that came from it was a doctor who wrote a poem about a code blue, which is when we try to resuscitate someone whose heart has stopped, and just how profoundly it affected her for it not to work and for the person to die and for her to sit there with this person who was dead who had previously been alive, and then to get chastised and punished by her attending for not moving on faster, for being too touchy feely about death. It was just a powerful read, and it just brought home everything that's wrong with my profession.
Yeah. Um, I had lunch today with my cousin, which was really great. Um, but we had lunch at the Google headquarters, and I'm here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and there's so much technology here, and there's just so much kind of faith in the machine. And it's not the machine that makes our life meaningful. At the end of life, when people look back, like what mattered, it was relationship. It was how the people we loved passed, and our relationship with them, and what we make of it and how we integrate it. It wasn't this or that machine or this or that size house or this or that, how quickly we did this, or how successful we were, any of those things.
Yeah, I was. I've been reading this German philosopher, Hartmut Rosa, and he's just finished a new book called "The Uncontrollability of the World," and he talks about how capitalism has created all these points of aggression, that nothing is okay just as it is, that we always need more technology, more money, more fame, better bodies, thinner bodies, cuter bodies, um, and it's never ending,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a source of ever mounting anxiety that we're not where we think we should be in relation to having more,
Yeah.
and I imagine you can really see that in Cambridge.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I love Cambridge. I love many things about it. It's a wonderful community, but there's definitely a lot of that striving for more, and not having enough time and always being busy. And one of the things I love about poetry is it focuses our attention, which is so rare these days. It slows us down. Um, you experience it in your body, and it's playful. Like when writing a poem, I find it's very different writing a poem than writing a kind of nonfiction piece, like kind of like not creative nonfiction piece, but just like a magazine article or something where you set out, you know what you're going to say and you say it. Whereas writing a poem or writing literature, it's a process of discovery. You don't know what it's going to be. And that kind of uncontrollability. You sit down and, oh, let me see what's going to come to me, and then you have words and images on a page, and then you're kind of in dialogue with them and discovering things. And certainly I found in my own writing process that I've learned things about myself from reading my poems that I didn't know. And my poems had insights into kind of what the story that my body was carrying before my conscious mind did. So I think all of that kind of striving is a desire to control that feels, for a child, like we want to control, but actually the mature position is coming into that sense of wonder and acceptance of what we can't control also.
Right, and I think that's really the project of this neoliberal capitalism is controlling everything. It's certainly the project of contemporary science is to control everything, and everything is not controllable.
And of course, the more we try to control things, the more things get out of control, right? It's like we think we have this amazing new invention. Oh my gosh, look at this. We found fossil fuels. Like, I can't quite blame people for thinking, whoa, look at what we can do. I was in New York City the other day and just looking at, like, how did we get all this stone onto this little island and build these skyscrapers? And like, can you imagine doing that without fossil fuels? So we have this incredible sense of like power. And yet what we've unleashed is going to, like, just see one of those tornadoes, or, you know, it's going to be so much more powerful, and in so many places already is, tsunamis and storms and floods, than, yeah, than we like to imagine.
Indeed. So, getting to the things that you discovered about yourself, it brings me to there were some poems that stood out in your new book, I Say the Sky. And one of them that stood out for me was your poem about pregnancy and birth. And I thought perhaps you want to read it and talk about it.
That would be great. Thank you. Um, Let me just find it. So this is called me.
It's on page 17.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Um, it's called The Physical World. And yeah, it's related to a lot of what we've been talking about. It's related to this lack of controllability and what the mind can't necessarily understand. The physical world. For 9 months, I anticipated, as the other end of pain, a revelation, a world turned inside out, the sure logic of arithmetic undone. Each inch I grew marked a failure and a promise, my present physical certainty, my approaching release. But instead, torn open, I gave birth to the end of ideas. Beyond pain was born no understanding, Beyond understanding was revealed no new way of knowing, new sight, but another body, robust, which no thought set screaming, purple-faced, infuriated at air, or moved closer to my breast, or closed its thinly lidded round, round brown eyes, so soon worn out by the unfamiliar light. So, yeah, just the experience of giving birth and that new body that comes out that I just so in love with. And I've made everything seem new and strange and just beyond comprehension. And poetry seemed like a place that could explore and begin to get at that space of almost beyond language. Like I like to use poetry to get to those places that narrative language sometimes can't get to in the same way.
And what I wondered about in reading them was that part of you that wanted some wisdom or enlightenment and didn't get it. Can you speak to that?
Well, it was a long time ago now, but I think this idea going to be a mother, right? I'm going to step into kind of a different level of adulthood and some kind of there must be some wisdom there, right? And instead it was felt more like really stepping into the unknown in a different way. Um, and and being greeted by just a lot of newness that I didn't necessarily have a handle on or couldn't didn't have any simple bows around it.
So it was uncertain new territory.
Definitely, yeah. And wonderful. I mean, I have to say, um, and I think that mostly it was an experience of awe, like this is bigger than me. Here it is, my body has birthed this, but it's just much, much bigger than me. Um, I'm kind of like a vessel for this larger experience that we're both kind of walking through.
Yeah, and I love that image of being infuriated by air. That was really something.
Well, it's so amazing being with babies. You really realize like this is all new to them, right? Everything that we take for granted, the air, just breathing, it's all new. And all those firsts, like figuring out, just opening their eyes for the first time and seeing the light. They've been in the dark for all those months gestating and then everything, and like figuring out their body in the air and moving differently and just like re relearning the world
Yeah.
through the eyes of my children. It could be anyone, but just children remind us, I think, of how amazing and unlikely everything is.
It makes me think of what the French say for birth. They say, "Elle voit le jour." She sees the day.
mm, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So, and that brings me to another poem I really enjoyed, which was the poem about your daughter only picking books about girls to be read at bedtime.
I will read that one as well. And this poem, I think, is a slightly more troubled poem for me, at least, because let me see if I can find it.
Approximately page 33.
Thank you so much, Lewis.
I read.
Um, well, my daughter has always been just so the first poem that I read was about the birth of my son. My daughter is younger, And she's just always been, I mean, both of my children have taught me so much. Um, she's been a teacher in so many ways and such a Buddha. But from the time she was very little, she just always wanted books about girls. It was like just super clear. And so I wrote about that. And then I was wondering at this point in the book a lot about um, my own relationship to gender and to what it had meant to be a girl, and what I partly remembered was sexual violence in my early childhood, and the ways in which those stories of gender violence weren't ones that were part of my story of my life. They weren't part of my um, conscious story. And then at a certain point, I started to look around me and I just saw them, you know, the violence against women and lack of freedom that so many women around the world have, kind of wherever I looked. And I was like, how do I make sense of this? Because it's here, but is it really part of, how do I integrate that with the other stories I've been telling about who I am? And actually my poems kind of brought me there before I consciously knew I was also writing about myself. Um, and then I kind of put the two together. Um, so this poem is kind of a sense that my daughter had a kind of knowing of her own identity, which I hope didn't include gender violence, but just her kind of sense of self. And then the way I kind of was spinning at that time around it, and what did my story include? So I can read the poem. Reading to my daughter. When you choose to read a book, it's always a book about a girl. I don't know if this means you have something I have lost or if I have traveled beyond you. When I look out into the world or imagine myself looking into the world, I see a window framing some trees. Where are the people? Who are the people of my world that I imagine at night when I fall asleep? But these nights I cannot sleep. Imagine, I tell myself as I lie in bed, a field. I imagine a field with a single tree. But it becomes a burning tree, its upheld limbs like a woman's. What have I done? The sky is the color of water. The earth turns to stone. I am thirsty. I want to drink. I lie in bed looking up to the dark. In the story, the princess is about to take a bite from the apple.
Very nice. I love that image.
Thank you. Yeah, and we always, all these stories of princesses taking bites from apples, and then, um, the apple's poisoned, or pricking their finger with the needle and falling asleep for 100 years. Just all these dangers that the girls in particular are navigating. And the tree, like the burning tree, I don't know if it comes across, but I was seeing it as like a stake where witches were burned, just the kind of ways in which um, these kind of bucolic images can be turned into something quite dangerous in a slightly, different telling of the story. So the kind of lurking dangers that we have in the stories and the images that we live around.
Yeah, and I was trying to think if I could remember any indigenous stories of women being poisoned by apples or pricking their fingers and falling asleep for 100 years, and I can't. And it strikes me that the indigenous stories about women are a bit more powerful than the European stories. There's a story about a woman who swallows a pebble and gives birth to a stone boy, who then becomes a magical creature who avenges evil. And um, and then there's a story about a woman who is being chased by an evil magician, and her no-face doll helps her to escape and overcome him. And I just thought, huh, this European tradition is sort of weird to use one.
It's a very traumatized tradition, right? I mean, I think about like the Greek myths. They're just so horribly violent. Um, and the fathers are killing the sons and eating them and raping the women, and then the families are slaughtering one another with revenge and revenge and revenge. And um, it's like, to have stories that don't come out of such a traumatized culture, to reimagine what story might look like and not think, oh, this has to be the story we repeat.
Mm.
And we can change the story. We can have different stories that we give to the next generation. Or we can go back to different traditions and find other stories, or go back to the stories in whatever tradition, we're part of, and find those stories that reinforce celebration and strength and justice and equality, all those things. Yeah.
Well, and you remind me of the ways that the Greeks sort of pathologized the Scythians and the nomads of the steppes of Eurasia.
Mm.
Creating that Amazonian myth of the women who kill their sons and cut off their breasts, and just really crazy stuff, because they couldn't deal with women being equal to men in those cultures.
Yeah.
Herodotus was one of the prime offenders of this mythologizing. And it's just unfortunate that that's the legacy of the parts of us that are European.
Yeah. 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 And it's so prevalent, and those are the stories that I was raised on, and I write out of that tradition, of course, because that's the literature that also teaches me. um, and so to in kind of, I feel like every area of my life, to find the aspects that I value and want to hold on to, and then find the aspects that I don't want to hold on to anymore. And I think that's just a very, very profound practice. I have been very influenced by the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, and he has a practice called touching the earth, where you um, bow down and thank your ancestors, and it could be your spiritual ancestors, the ancestors from the stories that have become part of you, your biological ones. And it's been a very deep practice of um, coming to terms with, this is where I come from, and I can't kind of cut out the parts of me that I don't like. I have to incorporate them, right? I mean, he has like the teachings of, we are the causes and conditions that shape us. And so I come from the heritage that I come from, and I choose how I want to interact with it, and also give thanks to it for giving me life and the tools that it has given me, but also and the flexibility to decide kind of what I want to do in the future.
And you remind me also that there's the one European culture of which I'm aware, in which women undertake epic journeys and overcome incredible obstacles, are Russian fairy tales.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking of the fairy tale about the Falcon Prince, in which um, this young woman has a lover who flies into her bedroom as a falcon, and her jealous sisters wound him, and he flies away, and she goes looking for him. And it's a mini. Well, I don't know how they measure time because it's not in anything I understand, but it's a long journey, and she confronts Baba Yaga, the witch, who ends up helping her, and undergoes all these trials and tribulations to find her prince. But he's the passive one, and she's the active one. She's the one who does all the work and overcomes the obstacles. And I thought, that's so different from a lot of European stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. My daughter, who's now 18, and to see her reading through literature, she's a great reader, and so she recently read War and Peace. And when I read War and Peace, speaking of Russian literature, Natasha's great, and her response was, "Oh, Tolstoy is just making Natasha into this image of a girl that he wants. She's completely fabricated by his own myths." And she really liked a character who I think most people don't think of as like a super positive character, Ellen, who's Pierre's first wife, because she's strong, she knows what she wants, she's plotting to get a divorce, like just a completely different reading, I think, even from what Tolstoy wanted. But she was able to, he writes so amazingly that he kind of paints these characters so that you can have your own interpretations of them.
Yeah. That's really interesting about your daughter. She's clearly moved into another level of understanding than we were born into.
Yes, yes, definitely. She's been my teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so maybe you could pick your favorite poem of the book.
Um, oh my goodness, I don't know what my favorite poem is. I can read another one that you said, a short one maybe.
Well, I was drawn to innovation as my goal.
Yes, and do you remember what page that's on? That you you're so good with page numbers. And I guess I want to say also, if we're talking about, as I look for it, the tradition out of which I come, and I do have a lot of relatives from Russia, but I'm also Jewish, so my relationship to the European tradition is also that angle, or I'm mostly Jewish. But even that, right? Like all the different relationships that we have to cultural heritages, and um, the way we do or don't fit into it.
Yeah, yeah. I think innovation was approximately
Towards
page,
the end, right?
roughly page 50-ish.
Okay, great. Okay, here it is. Um, so yeah, this poem, I think, if we're talking about stories and what we learn from, it's about learning from the earth. Invocation. Sleep, like a golden rain, fall through me. Hard earth that resists the shovel's metal blade, yield. Buried seed, grow plump, split. Push out your extravagant green tendril, reaching for the sun.
Very nice. And it's such a springtime poem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I think that's my invocation. That's the muse that I write towards, that, which also I say the sky, that kind of upward energy towards that solar energy that gives us light and life, and nourishes the plants and growing things and us.
And it made me feel like, so the sun shines down upon us and we strive to return toward it, to rise up toward what shines down upon us.
Yeah, I can share my cover image, which I which I like. I don't know if I can share my screen,
I'm pretty sure you can.
but
And
just
let me make sure.
found this really cool. I was looking for an image, and I'll show you what I found. I don't know if you can see it, but so it's a flower of a grape. It's a botanical drawing of a grape hyacinth. Um, I don't know if you can see it well enough,
Yes.
but and then the designer put the title kind of around it, so it looks like this flower with the root going down into the earth, and the flower kind of reaching up to the sun is kind of emerging through the title of the poem of the book.
How
So,
about so that particular poem could be the title poem in a sense.
yeah, yeah. I'll stop the share,
Yeah,
that energy of grounding down into the earth and reaching up to the sky that we see in, trees and flowers and plants and in ourselves, and that I think language does also. This kind of brings us on a journey where we're grounding down but also reaching up and have that full extension.
indeed. And so I've sort of driven your selection of poetry. So maybe you could pick one, perhaps even from your previous book that that I haven't selected.
Okay, let me see what I can do. I feel like it would be nice to end with something. Uh, okay, this is from my book, The High Shelf, and it's toward the end, and it's called Now. And in the middle of this book, there are a lot of poems in boxes, and I was very inspired by the boxes that Joseph Cornell makes, the kind of found objects. I could talk a lot about them, but I won't. So it's called Now. Not the box, not the high shelf, but the breath, leaving, coming back. I lived in the suspension, caught by what I did not know. Now summer comes again the heat of the sun, again the children's voices rising from the sprinklers in the park. Everything I wanted to say is taken up in their voices and dissipates. A squirrel comes down the fence and rummages in the basil, eats one leaf, then another, and runs back up the tree where it has its nest, high in the branches, neither caught nor unsupported. And tomorrow, that the squirrel knows how to gather for, gathering not too much, not too little. Tomorrow, that the squirrel does not even try to name.
Very nice.
That's really related to a lot of what we were talking about, that kind of striving into the future, that desire to control things that we as humans have, and the kind of natural instinct that the squirrel has. It is planning for a future, but it's also doesn't take too much, doesn't take too little, and is connected to the earth. So as how can we learn from the environment around us and be present, um, even as we go into the future?
Indeed. And I read something about how squirrels forget about 20% of where they bury things. That's what serves the trees.
Nice. Nice symbiotic relationship, right? They're taking the earth.
I,
And
I,
they're planting trees for their future generations. Do they forget it, or do they do that on purpose to actually bury the seeds and feed their future progeny?
question, or have the trees evolved the squirrels to do their bidding?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about your school.
Sure. So I mostly teach online classes, um, and you can find out more about it if you're listening on my website. Just Google Nadia Colburn. And I have a poetry class that I teach in the fall. It's called The Poetry of Attention, and we look really closely at six authors. And I believe that the best teachers of writing are writers and the writing that they've done. So we look really closely at poems and we write poems. And I'm also interested in the relationship between our writing life and our life beyond the page. And so, how can we um, how can we use forms of attention to live more fully, to live in like good relationship with the world and the people and the ecosystems around us, and use literature as a way to help us reimagine relationship and reimagine stories and where we place our attention. So I have that poetry class, and I have a class called Align Your Story that I offer in the spring. That's more of a kind of memoir class that you can use for any genre. And I always incorporate meditation and some embodied practices and yoga. So I'm also a yoga teacher because I really believe that our stories are in our bodies, that as we move and listen to our bodies, the story shifts and we're able to get to a deeper level and integrate in a deeper way, and then have that capacity to change the story as well.
Sounds like fun.
It is a lot of fun. It's a great community, and it's a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. And you reminded me of a session I had with a client today who has what she describes as terrible back pain.
Mm,
I asked her if she ever considered yoga, and she said, "Of course not. Maybe not quite in those words."
mm,
And what I've discovered is what I can hook people with is, I don't know if you know Dallas, DDPY, Diamond Dallas Page Yoga.
mm,
Oh, yeah, that's the thing I can hook people here in Maine with because he rehabilitated himself. He's a pro wrestler.
mm,
He rehabilitated Jake the Snake, another pro wrestler.
mm.
And then he has an amazing video about rehabilitating a disabled paratrooper named Arthur using yoga. And
Nice.
so I'm offering this to clients to try to inspire them to do yoga. Most
Nice.
unsuccessfully, I might add.
Yeah,
But
it's hard to begin. It's hard to begin something new. Um, I offer like little recordings of guided meditations, and then I read a poem, and then I give people time to write. And sometimes that's like a segue into short yoga, like to practice coming into that quiet. And I do pranayama, so different breath work and sometimes different, a little bit of movement in those. So it's like first step is just learning what it's like to sit still, and then moving the body in slightly different ways, but coming to that point of possibility where we're at a stiller place.
it's so important and so hard to convince people to do.
Yes, I know. Sometimes we just need to do it together, right? Like, okay, let's just take these 15 minutes and do it together. Just hit this recording. And then
Right.
it's so hard. Yeah, it's hard. It's different from the way we usually live. It's really different. And then getting the head beneath the heart, right? Like that reversal of blood flow.
Mhm.
We're not used to it.
Well, and it's the slow medicine. And most of my clients want the fast medicine. They want the pill.
Well, that's our world, right? That's what it's being offered to people. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So in the few minutes we have left, um, what do you have to share with us? Or maybe you'd like to read a final poem or
Yeah, well, I would just invite anyone to maybe you can have a link to my website and a link to a 5-day meditation and writing challenge that I offer that people might like, where it's just 15 minutes where you can just hit play and there's a little meditation and then a little recording, a little poem, as I said, and time to write. Because getting into the creative process, I think, like everything we've talked about, machines and how busy people are, but I really believe that we're all creative beings, right? And that's kind of like our birthright is to tap into that creativity that we all have. And most of us don't, or then we have a lot of judgment around it and think, who am I to do this? And just taking 15 minutes can really open up a whole part of oneself that's there that we're not always in touch with. And so even people who are very creative, sometimes doing this practice, it's like, oh my gosh, I thought I needed like 3 hours to get into a writing session. But with this method, it's like very fast. It's like a synergy of different things. So I would invite people to try that if they're interested. And yeah, I'll leave a link to that. And I guess I can read, if there is there time, should I read one more poem?
Yes, there's time for one more poem.
Okay, let me see. Maybe I will read the one of the last poems in I Say the Sky. Because this book, I Say the Sky, was very much about re-encountering myself and different parts of myself and integrating them. So that's what this poem is about. Rain pours off the eaves of the house onto the concrete, and finally I open my throat. World, I say, of floods and droughts, world of the red heart, the heart of pink beneath the clouds, of the tender-hearted, of the clenched-hearted, of the troubled, somersaulted, suspended-hearted. Someone is coming to meet me. The table is set, and I am coming down the stairs to open the door, dressed in blue jeans and a wool sweater with holes. And I am knocking outside, standing on the stoop. I think I am ready to open my arms right here in my own house to receive myself, to receive the sacred of this particular human form on this wet day in November, the last of the leaves ready to drop, rust, blood, brown.
Wonderful. What a perfect way to start.
Although it's not a spring poem, but even, in the future seasons, um,
All seasons are beautiful.
it's exactly.
It reminds me of Tolstoy, whom we talked about before, who said that all families are similar in their joys and all are different in their suffering.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for
Thank you
being.
so much, Lewis. It's such a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for your attention to my work and, yeah, your time. And thank you to everyone who has listened, and it's great to be here.
Thank you.